Namaste. Welcome to Urban.chatterati. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today I'm joined by two very interesting panelists. They both are young students pursuing their undergraduate studies in Delhi and in Lucknow at the moment. And we are going to discuss what the young generation is thinking on various contemporary issues like asset monetization, like freedom of speech on the campuses, like freedom to eat and drink what they want in the light of the Mathura order. And also we will see what they think about the trajectory of the Hindu polity as such. So Madhav and Yashovarman, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abhinavji. Thank you for having me over.
Thank you for inviting us, having us here.
Welcome. So can I please ask you to introduce yourself before we proceed? So Yash, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yashovarman Singh Chandel. I'm a fourth year law student, currently pursuing my studies from National Law University, Delhi. And I happen to be, before pursuing my legal journey, I happen to be a national level shooter who has been accorded the renowned shooter status. Along with it, I've been an avid debater who happens to read and write stuff for editorial magazines at schools and college levels. Along with all of this, I've been actively involved in social work activities such as plantation drives, teaching drives, and all of these. Other than this, I look forward and to associate myself with any sort of activities which help in developing this nation and anything which works in overall development of all of us as a nation. Thank you.
So Yash and Madhav.
Hello, everyone. I'm Madhav Agarwal. I'm a third year political science and international relations student at Ashoka University, Sonipat. I have also been involved in a lot of social activities. And previously, I went to NUJS Kolkata after clearing CLAT, but decided to drop out and instead join Ashoka. So, yes, thank you for having me over, Abhinavji. Looking forward to the session.
Interesting. So you chose the JNU for the rich kids over NGOs, right? So interesting. So let's start with the first issue, which is being debated. You can see on social media, everyone is talking about it. This new scheme of asset monetization by the government. So the opposition is now accusing the government that it is selling off everything and privatizing everything, and it will have a negative impact on the economy and on the society as such. So where do you people stand in this debate between public sector units or government-controlled economy and a more private capitalist market-oriented economy? Anyone? So Madhav, why don't you start?
Sure. See, insofar asset monetization plan of the government is concerned, and the debate of the conventional debate of private sector versus the public sector, I think it has been more than settled now in the 21st century that the efficiency, the speed, and the outcome and impact that the private sector can provide, that is unparalleled. And therefore, we should not look at it per se as a private sector versus a government sector debate. To look at it as a symbiotic relationship, the more we are able to look at it as a relation where both private sector, which is contributing the vision for that national building, for that nation building, work together, move together, and together create this ecosystem wherein the nation can develop towards a higher, towards the pre-decided goals. Only the plan of the government to raise about 6 lakh crore rupees by 2025 is basically the idea wherein the government is planning to lease out or to basically unlock the value of the assets which it has, be it in the form of railways, roads, airports, etc. And I personally do not look at it as a spectrum. I think that it is a novel initiative. It's an initiative which has the capabilities of unlocking the value, the undervalued assets which are lying idle with the government, and can enable to help the government meet the fundamental deficit which is happening insofar the budget is concerned.
Interesting. But Yash, I mean, what do you think about this entire debate? Because you come from UP, if I'm not wrong, and the debate is very strong that the government is selling out everything to the private corporations and nothing will be left for the people, no jobs and no employment. So how do you look at this debate? I mean, do you think that privatization is good per se, or the government should be running these entities?
I believe in order to reach the ultimate goal of making this country sail on the very positive side and to reach on to an extent where there is nation's growth in every aspect. So things which we need to realize is that this whole very asset monetization scheme comes because of a very integral reason. Generally, all the governments which have been, as the trend is this country has seen over all these years, is that a particular public facility, whether if it comes into the arena of commercial taxes, commercial business, and other commercial activities, the sole idea always remains welfare. So if you try to see it with the eyes of welfare, it is good that a state is supposed to reach out to certain extents in providing things to their local populace. But eventually, somewhere or the other, certain interests do get marginalized, because to look at everything with the holistic perspective of a government in order to run a nation, that is always not beneficial. That's one particular specific, very important reason. That is why we are not able to achieve the goals which the potential lies in certain of our assets. So let's say railways. So just like a route from Delhi to Lucknow, as we all know, Lucknow can be a common reference point. There are 7 Indigo flights flying every day, one and another. Imagine if there is corporatization of this whole very thing. If there is an asset monetization of the Delhi-Lucknow route, imagine how much benefit would our whole very transportation system would be able to reach. When there is competition, things tend to develop, and ultimately the main beneficiary in all of this is the citizens. So with more and more competition coming up, things would also work like all the incentives and everything in order to prove yourself out to be as a successful commercial entity. The narrative which all these other people try to run, that commercialization would come, and the interest of all these poor people and people below poverty lines would be marginalized. So I believe the government, in order to taking such steps, would be creating an efficient mechanisms in which the interest of every specific individual would be taken in hand. But along with that, this country has seen a mindset that everything becomes sarkari, so it starts being taken as a for granted facility. So in order to enforce transparency, accountability, and other aspects of governance, which is the very primary goals of governance, this is a very beautiful scheme taken out by the current regime. And I hope that it would add to more, it would unfold itself with more dimensions coming up in the future, in which every interest of society would be taken care of. Along with this, our country as a whole would progress. I would go on to the extent of even saying that it was a multi-win-win situation for all of us.
That's a very legalistic kind of an argument that shows that you are a lawyer. You have said so many things, but you have not come to the core point. Samajwad versus Punjiwad, what would you choose?
I believe the orientation which this country adopted from our founding constitutional fathers, and then after the 42nd Amendment came, and several other things which took place in our country, this whole country has been confused. I believe the politics of India is one particular country which is so culturally diverse, socio-economically diverse. It's so diverse in every aspect. I know you will again call me a legal student by saying so that I have not come to a specific conclusion, but the policies of this government too, so are always in order to cater to every section of the society. So let's say when people talk about the current regime, they put allegations of being rich friendly. You've seen that demonetization and other steps of this country completely prove them wrong. But then on to the extent of coming, we can even say that some steps taken by the government, let's say the faceless scrutiny of income tax officials and all these things, these have even instilled more and more faith and belief of the common populace of this country inside the current regime. So overall, I'd say that according to me, and this country's politics and this country's road ahead cannot be divided into two plain simple divisions of being pro-capitalistic or pro-socialist. You just need to mend your ways from time to time. It's a very circumstances-centric situation.
Very good point. So if you look at the policies of the Modi government, when it comes to free housing, free water, electricity, gas cylinders, they're very socialistic in orientation. But also you are seeing more and more freedom is being given to the private enterprise as such. So it's a good mix of pragmatism and the requirement. What about you, Madhav Agarwal? Of course, the Yashovarman didn't answer that clear question like a good law student. Now let's see a good political science student. How would you answer? Punjivad versus Samajwad.
Well, I'd support a Samaj wherein the Punji helps the Samaj, as well as a Punjivad wherein Samaj supports the wealth creators. Right. So fundamentally, I'd support relevance over either of the two, because many a times we see that we try to choose Samajwad or Punjivad in all these debates, but we forget that what is the basis of welfare politics? The welfare politics is based on the fundamental idea of welfare politics is to help the last citizen who may require assistance, right? In a country of 140 million people, of 1.4 billion people, we can very well understand that there may be sections of the society which may need assistance. But where will that assistance, that money for assistance come from? It will come from taxpayers. It will come from wealth creators. If our Samaj is not resilient enough, is not understanding enough to understand that wealth creators are necessary for the society, for the society to develop, to prosper, so that the wealth can be put to right use, then I guess we'll be failing to fulfill either the idea of Punjivad or Samajwad, right? So Punjivad is the bedrock of Samajwad. That is the fundamental thing that we have to understand.
Well, you've spoken like a proper political science person. I have a law student. I have a political science student. I think I should have called a mathematician as well, or an economist to give you a clear answer, this or that, this equation or that equation. But interesting perspective. But when you're talking about society and the wealth creation, individual efforts and as such, how do you see this debate about individual rights, freedom to choose what they want to eat or drink or something, versus the social norms, morality, and also the legal requirements?
Yes.
You go. Yeah.
So the very whole point of view which I'd say is that there needs to be individual freedom. But the very concept of, let's say, as a law student, I'd be quoting again, the concept of reasonable restriction, which comes in Article 90, is something which we as common citizens should always follow in our day-to-day lives. Because it is not enshrined in some sort of fundamental duty that we need to obey or something to do. But there is always a basic level of prudence and rationality which every person should dwell inside him. That is basic sensitivity, which forms the very core essence of you being a human. We say be a good human being. So when I talk about that, I'd say the freedom and choice to have everything is something which is irrational. The very point of having due regard for the other person's feelings is something which our whole Indian cultural ethos are based upon. So if someone comes on to the extent of saying, as very leftist JNU people would come on to the extent of saying that we don't care about your own Indian cultural ethos, but such irrational statements, such irrational stuff is something which if somebody comes on to the extent of saying that there needs to be a blanket law prohibiting cow slaughter or prohibiting certain types of foods, that isn't possible. But the very reason the foresight or the view where we need to take care in consideration of other person's feelings, irrespective of faith, irrespective of religion, caste, or creed, is something which we as individuals should enforce inside our own individual selves, rather than wanting the state to do for us. So I'd say it's more of a fundamental duty from the person within. I'd like to even share an experience in which I'd say that a friend of mine from Meghalaya, born in a Christian Catholic family, resided with me in a boarding school for 9 years. He was one such person who I knew would have consumed everything because his religion, that's how the way goes. But that was one person who used to go on every Shivratri with me to put Ganga Jal on to the deity, to put Bel Patra, perform all kind of Raksha Sutra and every sort of things. So I believe the whole very concept of this cohabits in every citizen. I'm not saying that he's one specific person of that particular faith who is doing it. This is something what Indian values stand for. Caring for the other person for what, caring for his feelings while doing it. To expect a blanket law and to expect something to prevail of that sort is something very, very flayed and something which could never ever come. So let's say if something such as respect your parents is one certain acronym which we hear in every household. We don't go on to the extent of questioning the constitutional validity of respecting your parents. We don't do that. That is something very irrational if somebody does that. We as a culture need to adopt such ideals. Similarly, we need as a culture need to adopt that our dietary preferences cannot be the reason for communal violence. I'm saying we need to have regard for the other person's feelings too, for what he's doing. Imagine it's no big deal. That's how we should take it. That's my point of view.
Interesting. And Madhav, he has made a very important point that everything is not about constitutional morality and other thing. But nowadays we see everything is either against the constitution, every small law at the municipal level is against the constitution, or is fascism at its greatest. How do you think this clash between individual liberty and rights and the social morality and the state orders or the law?
Well, it's a tough debate, very honestly. As far as in the clash between the individual liberty and the imposition of certain morality by the state is concerned, we need to understand that constitutionally, the Article 19 puts certain reasonable restrictions on the idea of freedom, which are subject to public morality, which are subject to the national integrity and the larger national interests, right? So even the constitution framers of this country realized that there can be no absolute freedom of speech and expression or any other sort of freedom as well, right? Eventually, at the end of the day, the idea of freedom goes hand in hand with your fundamental duties. And as the famous proverb goes, that your ability to rotate your wrist ends where my nose begins, right? So now if you say that I have an absolute liberty to move my hand wherever I want to, even if that hits your nose, I don't give a concern about it, then that is where morality will come into play. Surely you won't maybe file a case against someone for maybe touching your nose by mistake, but you have to be conscious of it. Morality and freedom both are born out of human consciousness. It eventually boils down to the idea that the more aware you are of the idea of natural justice, of what you can and cannot do as a human being, there you automatically are able to limit your idea of freedom and at the same time exercise your individual liberty in a sense where you do not feel constricted, where you do not feel choked, where you do not feel exhausted. Unfortunately, today there are some sections of the society which are proposing the idea of absolute freedom, absolute liberty, without recognizing and acknowledging the fact that we are living in a community. A community thrives and survives only where there is genuine tolerance and acceptance of the individual liberties of each and every one. So just imagine, okay, let's say in a secluded area, you are able to demand and say that, okay, I have this individual right and liberty. But what if 140 million people together start demanding the same? Then where do you put a chain to your individual liberty so that the other person's individual liberty is not constricted? Right? When one starts thinking from this perspective, they automatically start getting an answer to this idea of where the morality and where the state can restrict the individual liberty and where they cannot.
Interesting, but we are seeing this debate getting very polarized in the campuses, and you people are in the college. So what's happening in the campuses? This entire thing about azadi, freedom of expression, disregard for, talking too much about constitution, but disregarding the constitutional definition of India and the constitutional duties that you have to protect the sovereignty and integrity of India, with asking for Kashmir ki azadi and whatnot. The studies which are coming from undergraduate students in the places like this, which basically write in the topic itself, India occupied Kashmir, and it's entirely separatist propaganda. How do you see this debate panning out? Are you people facing it? Are you people seeing it in the campuses? If you differ from other person on certain point, what's the level of tolerance these days? Yes, Madhav.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up that question, Abhinavji, because I've been to a lot of campuses around the country. I have had the fortune of studying at 2 of them at the undergraduate level itself. And I realized that it is not only the problem of youngsters not understanding what the Constitution says or what the meaning of specific articles, in this case, the Article 19, what the meaning of it are, what are the judgments passed by the Honorable Supreme Court and Honorable High Courts in the past, right? The problem largely is that there is a lot of Western lens to looking at Indian problems, right? Today, I won't get into the morality of it. I won't get into judgmental values about it. But West has, to an extent, been successful in establishing the meritocracy, the upper hand of universities like Oxford, Harvard, and all the Ivy League universities. And youngsters are naturally attracted to that, especially when it comes to the urban youth who are eyeing for something that blimey idea of success, of greatness. What greatness means to them is making it to Harvard, making it what it means. Naturally, when that is your aim, you also want to become like the people who are going into that universities. Now, as that suffices well when you are studying courses like computer science or studying courses which are professional in their rigor. But when it comes to political science, which is a very region-oriented study, topics like philosophy, right? There can be very wide amount of difference in the way you look at world if you're studying the Indian philosophy and you are studying the American philosophy, right? So I think that is the place where the gap is emerging between this idea of what our constitution enshrines as freedom and what the youngsters today consider freedom to be. There is a lot of importedness in looking at what freedom is all about, and therefore all this and chaos that we have also witnessed, that as students move out of the campus and they are faced with the larger realities of the context in which they are operating, that automatically soothes it out. I'll give you an example. So there happened to be a senior at my school, and he went to join the Delhi University. He considered himself to be a leftist in his political ideology, and to the extent that he had officially joined the student wing of the leftist parties, and was all in and out. He was involved in student activism. And Nevertheless, being a senior at school, I'm grateful to be in a school where all shades of opinions were respected, and not only respected, we were good friends. We would talk, and just a difference of opinion never meant a difference in the way you look at a person, right? And I happened to meet him a couple of weeks back here in Lucknow itself. And I was talking to him, and I just asked him, like, what's the status of his student activism? And he told me that he had left student activism, and he had even left his university and changed his university because now he had realized the realities of life. So I think this is, though it's unfortunate that the realities which we as an ecosystem of formal education should be able to teach our students at the undergrad level itself, they are getting to learn at 3 years or 4 years down the line once they have passed out of the college. But yes, eventually I think this will narrow down, this thing will lessen as more there is greater awareness of your own social context, your own belief.
Very important point. As I was talking to ASG Vikramjit Banerjee, and he told me this very important point, that these people who go on the streets and shout Azadi, Azadi, and we have a constitutional morality, the fundamental basis of Indian constitution is not liberty, it's justice. It's the American Constitution which has liberty as the fundamental basis of it. So Yash, what do you think? This debate about freedom of expression on the campuses, you are a debater yourself. What has been your experience when talking to other students on the, let's say, hot topics of the day?
So I would completely second what Madhav said, that they're talking about India's romanticization with the West, specifically the US. So I would say America through Hollywood as its advertising agency has been very successful in being able to sell their country as an idea to the Indian youth. Specifically to such an extent that the common person, like if you see that how Indian values and everything is propagated in all these movies, you've been shown that Indians are nerds. That's how they are. And there are people who just snatch away the average American's jobs. They do these things, and they are like bookworms and everything. To such an extent that certain core values of, let's say, of every good society, let's say sincerity, let's say being organized, being disciplined, are something which are being loathed in such movies. What you're being projected and what you're being shown are as be a rebel, don't work, get sloshed, just stay at your place, go to hit clubs, hit pubs and everything. That is the idea that they are selling to the youth. I don't know whether their youth buys it or not, but certainly Indian youth does. So I'd say in all these things, and as you correctly pointed out, Abhinavji did, talking with liberty to be a prima facie a very important ideal of the US Constitution, whereas ours is justice. So when we talk about, if we differentiate between these two constitutions, American Constitution is completely federal. You can even burn the American flag and that won't violate the Constitution. That is the level of liberty that is vested inside them. But I'd say, in order to analyze between these two countries, have they reached something too far off in their country? Their own populace is now scared of their own country. There are things such as two racial supremacy developing in those countries. America has been suffering it from the very beginning of it. So why do we need to idealize that nation? I don't say that idolizing a particular nation is right or wrong, but I'd say that the very imminent need which arises of idolizing a nation is something which Indians should not. So coming on to what you said regarding the freedom of expression debate, writing Azadi, like feeling frustrated, feeling all these things which these people try to propagate, narrative that they try to run, and all these things. So I'd say these are very impractical things. These very people, let's say how a particular Indian household is being preached. No matter we're a democratic country, we are very, but I'd say 90% of the populace of our country don't have democracy even in their own homes. I don't say that that is something to be bought or that is something to be sold, but it is the idea and values to which our Indian culture gives importance. And that is the very USP of our Indian culture. So when we talk about freedom of speech and expression, of course, nobody needs to be frustrated, but there's a way where you need to show, or there's a specific way in which you need to propagate your voice. If you violate in that manner, if you try to cross the line, if you try to do such things, and I'd say this whole very narrative which is being run is very futile. It is not going to lead to any extent. The very reasonable restriction thing, very judicious, very eminent scholars have gone on to the extent to devise that doctrine of our constitution. And so far, everything is going inside of that. I would even like to talk about the models of, let's say, democracy in which India is successful in adopting it. So let's say if we talk about the France crisis of secularism, the French model of secularism, in which the person is delineated from this church, the person is delineated from, completely disassociated from the religious ideals. That is the reason for their minorities, coming up to the extent of killing their teachers and everything. That is the very reason, that is the very trigger point of them. Whereas the Indian model of secularism, which doesn't completely violate it, if you wish to wear a tika to school, or if you wish to wear a skull cap to school, you're not something which the form of liberty which exists in a country doesn't restrict you from wearing that. Whereas in France, you cannot do that because their idea, which they have adopted, is to completely disassociate religion with culture. So I believe even the West, this narrative which the West is trying to run, that people are curbed in India and women are being suppressed in India, and all these things are pretty much false. Whereas the Indian model is more associative, Indian model is more wide, and I believe we should stick to it. There's no point in idealizing a particular country's policies, which have led to almost nothing in all these years.
Sure, Yash. That's a very fair point, Yash. But Madhav, coming to you, he's talking about how the people have confused ideas about what India stands for, what is the socio-political context of India, and we want to become like Americans or some Westerners and so on. Do you think of a formal education system has failed us? You have completed 3 years now. Do you think that what you are studying, what you are learning in the school and the colleges, is it of any relevance at all, professionally and also otherwise? And be very honest about your answer. I'm not a big fan of the education system, but you can be honest.
Abhinavji, I'm not sure if I'll be the best person to give an opinion on it, because it's not just about the formal education of India. I'm particularly someone who isn't in for the idea of formal education at large. I believe that after a point of time, especially in the context that we are existing today, the post-COVID world, the 21st century, the relevance of formal education as a whole, as a system where you teach students what to think, right, and where to refer to think more on that thing, the relevance of that has gone down by drastic levels. We are entering an age where we don't know what kind of challenges we may face in the future. The COVID-19 pandemic has completely expanded the horizon of what uncertain future we may face. And therefore, given that any education system, any formal education system should be preparing its students not for 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line, but for 40 years down the line. That's the horizon which should ideally be taken into context. I believe that the fundamental idea that the education system in India has been too theoretical in nature, has been too bookish in nature, tries to impose interests upon students rather than taking into consideration until now the fact that a student can have diverse interests. I could be wanting to study astronomy. Simultaneously, I may want to study history. And I may also want to take up some language, some regional languages, maybe Kannada, maybe Malayalam, even when I'm coming from North India. So the existing formal education system in India, I felt largely disincentivized students to be intellectually curious. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's a fair point, Madhav. But Yash, coming to you, what do you think? What has been your experience of 4 years now?
And say, talking about my experience per se. So I happened to be a science student who eventually wrote CLAT and all these examinations, CLAT, ALIT, and eventually ending up in a law university. So I'd say my journey began that the very idea of Indian education system is to not create intellectual thinkers because of its Korean legacy, which has been following over the years. The very idea of having attendances and persons standing up, standing in rows to get something is to create workforce for the factories. I will go on to the extent of saying that. And this is something because Indians per se were never seen as intellectual brain to the world, to which what British wanted them to be. They never wanted them to be decision makers, the ones in authority. Moreover, if we even see one more big example which says out that if you go to a class of lower kindergarten or upper kindergarten and you ask people questions, so they ask you very nice questions. Why is the grass green? Why is the sun yellow? Why is the sky blue? That is the amount of curiosity they have inside them. It is something that this formal education system does to them that after 12 years, there's so much involved in their specific numericals and everything that they don't even go to the extent of wanting to learn something outside of it. Like if I'm doing integration, if I'm doing algebra or something, what is it going to benefit inside my life ahead? The person just does it for the jobs. That idea is being sold to us so much. That is being somewhat the reason of intellectual deprivation of this country. I would say this country has produced various intellectual minds, but a nation of more than 100 crores, 150 crores is something which could lead the world, and especially the Vishwaguru which we were, and the geniuses which we produced. I believe this formal education system has taken certain grave steps and has not been able to be so successful that our earlier education system.
Fair point. I mean, I will say that we're not even preparing factory workers. We're failing even on that account. So most of the people who pass out from the colleges and the schools, they don't have the skills even to work in the companies. But that's a different, wider debate. Perhaps we can discuss all those things later on. But coming to the final issue, which I want to discuss with you. We know there's a global conference being organized by the humanities departments in America, Dismantling Global Hindutva. And the tone and the language is, nothing to do with Hindutva, is entirely anti-Hindu and so on. In India, we are also seeing that lots of people are equating Taliban and all those terror groups with BJP, RSS, Hindutva and whatnot. How do you people see Hindutva and the Hindu right? Because that's the ruling ideology of India as of today. I will actually go as far as to say that was always the default system of India in different, let's say, shades and colors. Even Congress before independence was always called a Hindu party. And the language they use against BJP today, they were using against the Congress before the independence. That is the fascist, Hindu majoritarian and whatnot. How do you see Hindutva, Yash?
I'd say the very idea of Hindutva stands for association. It is something most anti to the caste system. It is something very, very anti-casteist. Specifically with what people try to run, the narratives these left-wing people try to run, that Hindutva stands for Brahmanical superiority. That is completely a very big farce. I believe the contribution, the person, Veer Savarkarji, the person who coined the very specific term or person who brought it into light, was one person who drastically improved or changed this whole caste system in Maharashtra. He was the one who organized Dalit lunches, mass lunches for Dalit people. he being himself a Brahmin used to have food with them, organize lunches, and that being a very big caste taboo at that time. So this whole narrative, which all people, these left-wing ideologies, and what people try to run, that Hindutva stands for Brahmanical superiority, it isn't. Being in a seeing the working of RSS, something Hindutva, what stands for it, forms the very core value basis and ethos system of RSS. It has always been so inclusive, very, very inclusive of the fact that Dalit people in every certain downtrodden sections of the society do exist. Now, coming in, what these forces are trying to anti-India, or they say any, I won't go into the extent of naming them, but all these forces, the terms that they are trying to, the very comparison with Taliban and all these things are quite, I'd say, very different. Hindutva is one specific step which talks about making Bharat a Vishwaguru. Hindutva is one step which talks about complete unified, completely unison in India, whereas they are trying to project it as a discriminating factor, which is completely wrong, which is completely abhorrent. It is the very idea which these people try to run with Hindutva, toward associating it with terror forces, Hindutva associating it with Brahmanical superiority, and everything tells us in itself, it's very self-explanatory how much they are scared of Hindutva, to watch the real Hindutva remakes. And I just say that this is the most misinterpreted term of this century. Hindutva has been seen as something which is completely not. And organizations such as the RSS have fallen prey to it. And that's all.
Interesting points, Yash. What about you, Madhav? How do you see Hindutva and this entire movement?
Well, Abhinav ji, in my opinion, Hindutva, going literally by its meaning to be Hindu-ness, by what Savarkar had written in his book, Hindutva was the political answer, was a socio-political answer of a geo-cultural entity that populated the land that we today mark as the Republic of India, as that geographic land, when it came into interaction and exploitation of the religio-cultural entities of what today we call as the Middle East and the colonial rule of more than 200 years. It was that political answer of a geocultural entity. If you go by the understanding of what Savarkar calls as Hindutva, you understand that there is a common chain of thought which is disturbing all these thinkers in the early 20th and late 19th century. We are a country wherein people are called as Hindus, but they, as the colonialists rightly pointed out, they all pray to different deities, right? They have their own different cultures. The person who is in maybe Rajasthan and praying Khatu Sham Baba may not be the same as a Hindu from Odisha who is praying Lord Jagannath, right? Then what is the similarity between the two that makes them feel that okay, that we are Hindus, that we are belonging to that same community, that same canopy of faith? It is the answer lies in Hindutva. It is the answer of a common geocultural entity which goes back and traces back to the same roots of this very land, right? If you come to look more closely, all the deities that exist in the Hindu culture per se are provincial or local individuals that are somewhere embedded in their mythology, to have walked on that piece of land centuries back and had done some great deed, because of which they are admired by the people of that region. So when we worship Lord Ram, there are proper evidences which exist that there was this great king who had carried out the Ashwamedh Yagya. Today there's this city in Cambodia named as Ayodhya, which literally translates to Ayodhya in India. which gives the evidence of the fact that there was this great king which had existed in India sometime a long back. Same goes for Sri Krishna. If today he is known and is worshipped all around the North India, and his acts are admired by the Hindu populace, then I think Sitaram Goel in his book Why I Am a Hindu writes very, very precisely that my devotion to Lord Krishna began with an admiration with the strength of the characters in Mahabharata, which later turned to admiration, which further metamorphosized into worship. So that's the trajectory which this land has and this geocultural entity of Hindus have followed over the centuries. Unfortunately, because Hindu was a term that we did not devise on our own. It came when Greeks came and called us Hindu, literally meaning the people who live beyond the Sindhu River. It was the name which was called to us by the Chinese. If you go to China today and you say that I am from India, they don't recognize you. You say that I am an Hindutva, they immediately recognize that you are from this land which we today call as India. So because Hindu was literally a term which was superimposed on us from outside, we fail to recognize and find that commonness amongst us as to what makes us a Hindu, right? As I pointed out earlier, that I am worshipping one God, you're worshipping one God, but what makes us a Hindu? And the answer to this was the socio-political answer to this in the backdrop of what Jinnah was coming up with, in the backdrop of communal disharmony, which was widening in the country in the early 20th century, the idea of Hindutva was born. Now, for those who equate it with Taliban and all, it's as a political science student, I would say that that's really humorous, because that shows that you neither know Hindutva nor do you know Taliban. So that would be the simple answer which I would like to give to it.
Interesting, Madhav. Great answers by both of you. And this is interesting to know what the younger generation is thinking about these topics. And I think it was a wonderful discussion. We will have more such discussions maybe a few months later. You can come and join another discussion on some other issue. But thanks a lot for your time. Yes, especially because I know you are on a vacation, you're enjoying yourself. But thank you for taking out time.
Thank you. Looking forward to all of them.
Thank you, Abhinav.
And thank you, audience, for listening to us. Please subscribe to the channel and see you soon.